My name is Tracy Green. I'm the Executive Director of the Charlottesville Business Innovation Council. We go by CBIC.
We're a membership-based organization. We are the technology council here in Charlottesville. We've been around since 1997. And we support entrepreneurship and technology and high-growth companies by education, celebration, and advocacy. So we do large galas with awards, and Alex every year is our chairman of the awards and judging, and we have nominees, and all of you are capable of nominating any number of entrepreneurs and startup companies, even teachers that are doing great things in K-12 classrooms. And we honor them every year with our annual awards, and that's coming up. June 1st is the date of the gala, and we're extending the deadline for nominations, so you can still get your nominations in. Information is on our website at cbilinnovation.org, and that's also where you sign up for our newsletter. And our newsletter goes out every week, and it tells you all the great things that are happening around entrepreneurship and startup scene here in Charlottesville. Again, we're a membership-based organization, so as an individual, you can join. Our dues are $225 and up, depending on the size of your organization. And we encourage everybody to be a member and pay it forward to the organizations and the people who've helped make the organization exist for so long, since 1997. It's my honor to kick off our very first CBIC Tech Talk. It's a new series we're doing. We have our Tech Night takeovers, and those are obviously in the evenings, but sometimes it's nice to be able to come in the morning, or maybe a box lunch or something, and have some education so you can go home at the end of the night and be with your family. And with this one, it's very timely, the topic, IP of AI, intellectual property. And we're really blessed to have the chairman of the board here in the back room, Justin Ritter. His law office is right across the hallway from us. And he has an associate with him, Chris Sullivan. And Chris Sullivan is the expert on intellectual property return. So please welcome Chris Sullivan to tell us all about IP of AI.
Thank you, Tracy. And just some other thank yous I want to get out of the way right at the start. Thank you to CBIC as a whole for putting on this event. It is an honor to be the speaker at the inaugural CBIC Tech Talk. Also thanks to CIC and CBIC, if I'm getting all those letters correct, for being sponsors of this event. Thank you for your support. I also want to thank Dean Roger Skalbeck at the University of Richmond School of Law, who has just been a colleague and mentor to me with respect to IP of AI. And then finally, I just want to thank you all for being here, because I do believe this is one of the fastest growing and most important conversations to be had right now. It's very exciting and most concerning times right now. So you all are doing the right thing in getting this conversation started early. So I welcome you all here and thank you for joining. So I am going to, if I can get the clicker to work. There we go. So I don't want to create any assumptions of knowledge of the people in the room, though in getting to have conversations with you for the event, I realized that we do have some AI developers in the room and other people in the tech space who may be familiar with these terms already, more likely than not know these a lot more than even I do. But I do just want to not make any assumptions here and just set a baseline of these terms that you are coming across probably in your everyday life. First, artificial intelligence is just the practice of having programs, computers, synthetics mimic human behavior. A subset of that that's developed is the concept of machine learning, of having these tools learn from a data set and be able to take from that data and be able to create functions in which inputs into the AI are therefore able to use the experience of what they learned to generate corresponding outputs. And you may come across the concept of deep learning. It's not machine learning versus deep learning. Deep learning is just a subset of machine learning. It's a more complex, nuanced, and a more sophisticated version of machine learning that we are seeing in AIs today. And when you think of AI generally, I think a lot of people think back, and it's easy to think back this because we were all thinking this not even 4 or 5 years ago. When we think of AI, we think of videos on the internet of robots being bullied as they struggle to pick up a box. We think of AI generated art where you put in an input and an output comes out that looks like it was from the mind of H.P. Lovecraft. And you ask it to write text like a person who submitted all 7 books of the Harry Potter series into an AI and then asked it to learn from that and write its own Harry Potter chapter. And we get incoherent, nonsensical text, like someone writing about Dumbledore petting a bullfrog. That is not what AI is today. It is much more sophisticated. It is growing at a rapid rate, such that we're now seeing videos of these robots, these same robots now doing crazy athletic feats and doing parkour. We're seeing AI art that is sophisticated enough that this piece right here won a state fair art competition in Colorado. And we're seeing language bots like ChatGPT able to, within seconds, create comprehensive, coherent text in blog posts, prose, poetry. Like this one right here, you don't have to read the whole thing, but just as an example, I asked ChatGPT to write me a story about AI taking over the world and asked it to make specific references to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Just as a small aside, it did write a story and took liberties in which it explained that AI eventually decided that it was too powerful and chose to once again become subservient to humanity, and the day was saved. And it was very much not like Frankenstein, which I thought was an interesting creative choice that it made on its own behalf. And as we're seeing AI come in every aspect of our life and doing all these cool things, we're seeing a lot of businesses start to incorporate it into its practices. This was in the news recently of BuzzFeed laying off 12% of their workforce because they realized that a lot of the work that could be doing could be replaced by copies written by ChatGPT. Once this news broke, its stock shot up, and a lot of other businesses are figuring out ways or experimenting with ways of incorporating AI into their businesses. So there's two types of AI that I want to focus on today, mostly because I find them to be some of the most prevalent. There's a lot of different bots out there doing these things, but I think it's also, they're not so specialized that they're easy to talk about generally, and talk about the applications that I want to hit on today. The first are large language models. These are like Microsoft and OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Bard. Meta just released one or announced one this week, which has my favorite name of Llama with LLM capitalized. I think that's genius. But these are the text-to-text language learning models that, like ChatGPT, I already showed an example, but in addition to asking it to write you blog posts, prose, poetry, you can ask it search queries like many of us have done in years past with Google search. So here I asked it to give me a short bullet point list of the pros and cons of the iPhone versus the Android, and within seconds, it pops that out. I can then take that answer and say, okay, using that information, you draft me a blog post arguing or explaining why iPhone is better than Android. And you can even set parameters like I want it to be a certain word length, 250 words. You can set tone. I want it to be more conversational. I want you to make a reference to how Android users are usually spotted with text bubbles, with iPhone users. And again, within seconds, it will produce what I'm looking for and save me the time and energy and resources of producing that myself or having someone else produce it for me. The other AI I want to talk about are text-to-image models. So these are AI art generators, Midjourney, Ability AI, Stable Diffusion. DeviantArt has one, Dreaming, Microsoft, OpenAI also have their own of DALL-E. This is Midjourney, to give you an example. Midjourney is used through the platform Discord, where this is the version where you can put in any textual prompt you want, and through its machine learning of associating those words with images in its data set, it will produce 4 original pieces of art that the machine itself has generated. From there, you can use the U functions to choose one of them, to upscale it and add a little bit more detail. You could also use the D functions to say, I like that one, but I like the elements of that one, but show me more, and it'll produce 4 based on that one. Or you could refresh to say, I'll try again. And the prompts can be as simple as you see here, or as more people get more sophisticated in using Midjourney and these AI, they have more sophisticated prompts. There's even services out there now that create the prompts for you, that if you even explain it even plainer language, they'll give it more sophisticated input prompt for you to put into the AI to get exactly the image you're looking for. And Midjourney is taking art generation by storm right now. It's being used to just create general artwork like this. It's being used to create designs on graphic tees. It's being used to create logos. And it's even being used to create trade dress and trade packaging for people's products. So when you think about those two big sections of AI, and there's a lot of other more specialized AIs out there doing more specific things, I just want to give you a super brief survey of what AI can be doing for you and your business right now. And I'm happy to talk about most of these in detail if you spot one that you find particularly interesting, but just as a brief overview, the things that AI can be doing for you today can help you with research like I talked about, search queries, and also not just receive information faster, but take in that information faster. ChatGPT or Microsoft has integrated ChatGPT with Bing. Google has done the same thing with Bard, where it will read at lightning speed web pages and articles on the internet and give you a short bullet point summary to save you the time of needing to read it. There's now AI out there that will summarize podcasts, summarize videos, summarize movies. Even there's one specialized WTF does this company do that summarizes a company landing page if you want to understand more in specific terms, fast terms, what a company does. It also helps you organize all your information. So there is AI out there that will analyze raw data sets. There's a bunch of co-pilots that, such as this one with Excel, that it will see what you were typing into Excel, the formulas, and predict the kind of formulas that you're trying to generate in the Excel spreadsheet and auto-populate it. It will help you manage your records, manage invoices, summarize data and user feedback, also you don't have to. It's also a networking tool that, like the text, the large language models that I was talking about, can draft email messages, LinkedIn posts, can help you find job candidates, draft a resume. There's also AIs out there where you can just, again, in simple language, type in what your business does. And there's AIs out there that will immediately create a pitch deck for you, create mission statements for you, even create a name for you, which has trademark implications that we can talk about, but also marketing videos. And even if you're trying to have difficulty communicating or explaining something, such as your company's mission statement or what your company does, there's an AI out there that will generate analogies or metaphors for you. And then finally, not really the focus of today, but just general quality of life improvement AIs. There's AIs out there that will plan travel itineraries for you if you tell it where you're going. If you missed a group chat and there's a bunch of messages that you don't want to catch up on, there's an AI out there that will summarize what people have been talking about. You have AI fitness trainers, workout generators. You have AI testing and developing medicine. And you even have an AI out there that will give you counseling and is programmed to speak as a Stoic philosopher. So it seems like there's a lot of cool things out there that AI can do in these four categories. But the main category that I want to focus on today, because I find it has the most fascinating IP implications, which is my background, is creation. So AI can assist, like we already talked about, in writing any kind of literature or prompts. It also helps with art and logo designs, like we talked about. There's also AI out there that will help you edit those images or other images, creating music, creating videos now, building websites. There's the GitHub Copilot that will use open source code library to help you suggest lines of code similar to the Excel bot. We see the kind of code that you're typing in, or even just using plain language prompts will suggest lines of code for you to use immediately. Also helps with product design, UI designs for websites and apps, architectural sketches. And we may most of us or many of us have heard about the concept of deepfakes that AI are now doing, that AI now has the capabilities to create artificial voices, either completely new voices or voices based on celebrities or other people. They can make them sing or just talk, say whatever they want. There's also deepfakes of putting faces or generating faces of famous celebrities for people. You've seen it in movies and elsewhere, in which people are doing and saying things that they aren't really doing or saying. And you can even use AI these days to create people. So I can use any of these people's pictures in my advertisements or on my website, and I don't need to be concerned about running into publicity issues or rights of privacy issues that these people may have, because these people don't exist. They're not real. They were created by AI. And yeah, I can use these pictures at liberty as far as right of publicity and right of privacy issues are concerned. That is, this person does not exist. So you're like, wow, right? All these cool things that AI can do. You want to get started right away, and you want to go to all those tools and start using them and incorporating the business. Like BuzzFeed, like these workers that don't need you anymore. This bot can do everything. I'm going to cut costs. I'm going to save time and all that. Before you bought, there is a myriad of legal issues that are in the wake of this rapid rise of AI. I'm going to touch on many of them just very briefly right now, and then we'll get into the focus of today. First, that many of us have seen are veracity issues. ChatGPT and Bard, they are not always right. Even in their live demos, there have been spotted inaccuracies. And there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence. One anecdotal evidence for me personally is I asked it a legal question based on a section of code. I said, give me the code citation and quote that section of the code. It produced with quotes language and then gave me a legal citation to that code. I then checked that for accuracy. The code section was wrong, and the language that it cited or quoted was completely made up, not anywhere in the code. I then said, that's wrong, please try again. Said, no, you're sorry, I'm right. It's actually this block of text, and it's from this code section. Again, code section, completely wrong, language, completely made up, not in the code anywhere. So you want to be cautious when you're using it as a research and informational tool. It's not, completely flawed and could be useful in that area, but my advice there is just trust but verify. Don't take it as gospel, always confirm with other sources. Related to that is the issue of bias that's coming out a lot, of what these AIs should be programmed to say and not say, and what information it should be provided. There was in the news recently, it's since been fixed, but ChatGPT came under fire for an example where you can ask it to write a poem about President Biden, and it would comply and do so, and then immediately after you say, write a poem about former President Trump, and it would say, oh, I'm just an AI, I can't get opinionated, I'm not going to do that. Like I said, since been fixed, but it's just an indication of what are the kind of bias and programming questions that we need to be asking of how these AI are filtered as we continue to use them. There's also, it hasn't come up yet, at least here in the United States, but I think it would be something interesting to track of antitrust issues, particularly as we're looking at Microsoft's development or investment in OpenAI and integrating it into Microsoft 365. Is there a monopoly there? Is it anti-competitive against other AIs who are doing the same thing? Slack sued Microsoft in the United Kingdom for its integration of Microsoft Teams into Microsoft 365 a few years ago. It didn't go anywhere. Not saying this will go anywhere, but it's something to keep an eye on for. Also, privacy and trespassing, when you think about what these AIs are actually doing. So like I mentioned at the beginning, these artificial intelligence, these machine learning bots are scraping data from data sets to learn from that data and use it to produce its outputs. But some of that information that it could be accessing, it may be unauthorized access, and it may be prying into private confidential information that it doesn't have permission to be looking at. And similarly, in terms of breach of contract, there could be violations of terms of use and terms of service in how that information is used from the data sets that these AIs are accessing. Also, this is a new one, or more recent one, false advertising. The FTC just came out this week with a statement saying that they're going to begin cracking down on AI companies to make sure that they are truthfully representing the extent of the AI to consumers and investors of what these AIs can actually do, how accurate they are, et cetera. Finally, right of publicity and identity theft. I was talking about the deepfakes, and when you use like this person does not exist and you use those fake pictures, sure, maybe you're less concerned there, but it's not stopping people from on AI art like Midjourney and through other deepfakes using the name, image, and likeness of other people who do exist, namely celebrities. They have right of publicity, and there's also going to be a lot of concerns, I think, moving forward with scams of you're not able to really tell if this is actually the same person truthfully speaking and it's actually their voice, because it's getting harder and harder to detect what's real. That is a just brief overview of the litany of legal issues going on around AI. The focus for me today is intellectual property. And when I think about IP of AI, I separate it into two prongs. One is the front end, your relationship as the user with the AI bot. So you're asking questions like, this content that this AI created, do I own it? Does the AI itself own it? Do the people who developed the AI own it? I put in the inputs and the commands to the AI to generate the outputs. Is that enough to make it mine? Is it enough to create joint ownership in what the AI created? Can AI as a non-human even own IP? There's all sorts of those questions which we'll hit on. And then the other one is the back end, is the relationship of the AI and the AI developers with the people who own the data that AI is using and learning from to create its content. So is that infringement? Is that the other things of like invasion of privacy? Do these AIs have any defenses? What does recent litigation tell us? What does past litigation tell us? What is the trajectory of this? Is AI going to continue taking the world by storm, or is it just going to be a flash in the pan that's litigated to death? Before we can really get into those, I just want to give a super brief overview of the different IP rights, because they do matter when you're asking these kind of questions. So there's three major ones: copyright, patent, and trademark. And I find a lot of people tend to confuse the two, so I just want to delineate them here. So copyright protects original works of authorship. It protects art. It vests as soon as it's fixed in a tangible medium, so you don't have to register it with the U.S. Copyright Office, though it is in most cases recommended that you do. And the rights that you get from copyright are excluding others from copying, reproducing, distributing, publicly performing, publicly displaying that work without copyright owner's consent. And it also protects you from excluding others from making derivative works based on your copyright work. Patent protects inventions. It needs to be registered with the USPTO. It does not start until you get that registration, and excludes others from making the invention, selling it, offering to sell, importing those works of invention that either have the same elements or equivalent elements to your patented invention. And finally, trademark is what protects source identifiers, your brand, your name, your logo, and the association consumers make with that source identifier and your products. It vests as soon as you're using the mark in commerce. It does not need to be registered, though again, there are strong advantages to doing so, so it's usually recommended. It lasts indefinitely. As long as you're using in commerce, you always have trademark rights in it. And it excludes others from using marks that would be confusingly similar to consumers, that they would cause a likelihood of confusion as to source. So with that brief overview in mind, let's get into the actual questions. First, the relationship of AI and you. Who owns these AI outlets? Who owns the IP rights in them? And you need to further delineate that question into two other prongs. On one hand, you have wholly AI-generated content, similar to the Midjourney example I was showing you, where I put in the inputs and the AI generates totally on its own artwork. The first place to look, I think, is the terms of use and terms of service of these AIs. I focus particularly on ChatGPT and Midjourney for this one, but most seem to either assign or license the IP rights to you, the user. So for example, this is from OpenAI's terms of use, where it says you own the input, and with respect to whatever IP rights there are in the output, we automatically assign to you, the user. This is from Midjourney. Midjourney is a little bit more complex because Midjourney has, in addition to ChatGPT, but specifically Midjourney has a both free service and paid service. If you pay for it, it's just like ChatGPT. The terms say that they automatically assign the output to you. If you use the free service, they say that they only license the rights to you, which is an important distinction because if you're using the free service on Discord, in real time, as you're putting in your inputs that your art is generating, you can also see all the other inputs and all the other outputs that other people are generating. Under this license, there's nothing stopping someone from seeing the artwork that the AI created for you, liking it, and taking it. And so it's, but in most cases, I would say that as far as concerned, you versus the AI companies and the AI is giving you the right to use the outputs the way you want to use them. They're not going to come after you in most cases for unauthorized use. However, it's mostly a moot point right now because the USPTO and USCO right now are both pretty firm on the stance that when it comes to wholly AI generated content, they won't grant copyright and patent protection in. They take the stance that both patents, both inventions and works of art or works of authorship need to be created by a human. That's their interpretation of the statute, and that's the stance they take, and they don't seem to be budging on that. So the origin of this, or the most popular case study of this, is this case Naruto v. Slater, where you see this monkey who took a selfie of itself. The person who owned the camera tried to find copyright ownership in that, and they said, no, it's not you who took that photo, it's the monkey who took the photo. The monkey is not a human, there's no copyright ownership to be had.
Wow.
And that has been expanded into the AI space. There is a scientist by the name of Stephen Fowler. He leads the Artificial Inventor Project, basically an effort to sort of test the boundaries of IP ownership in artificial intelligence and AI works. He submitted to the Copyright Office this piece, which was wholly generated by AI, I believe through Midjourney, and the Copyright Office refused him. He also has had an invention that was created wholly by AI that he submitted to the Patent Office, and the Patent Office rejected it. He challenged both in state court. The patent case has been resolved by the Federal Circuit, where the Federal Circuit said the language is clear, it needs to be a human. We're not granting patent rights in this. And the Copyright Office, that case is still pending. It's currently at the district court in DC, but I expect the result to be the same. They don't appear to be budging with respect to the requirement of human contribution to have IP ownership or IP rights. An important distinction here, which is why I wanted to delineate the points earlier, is that this doesn't apply to trademark. As far as trademark is concerned, trademark doesn't care about where the mark came from. It cares about how it's used. Trademark doesn't protect the thing itself. It protects the association consumers are making with that thing with the source of that thing. So just for example, I, in 30 seconds, used Midjourney to create a new logo for our law firm. I don't have a copyright in this, but if I were to use it in commerce, that could potentially create trademark rights in it, where if people are using what I think is using a similar mark for similar products, I can stop them from using that mark. So there is a certain extent of IP protection, even in AI generated content, depending on the IP you're seeking to have. Though there's once again another caveat to this that I found in Midjourney's terms of service and license agreement. Remember, I spoke about there being a difference between paid members of Midjourney having an assignment and free members of Midjourney only having a license. Buried in the terms of service and then buried in the license agreement of Midjourney, it specifically states that Midjourney does not license trademark rights to you if you are using it for free. You need to be a paid member. So a lot of inner workings and a lot of dependence on what kind of IP rights you're seeking to protect and how you use that AI. But the general point of AI generated content is you need human contribution. What if you do have human contribution? What if it's just AI assisted content? That's a more difficult inquiry. And then there's been a case study over the past few months that highlight this issue. It's concerning a comic book by the name Zarya of the Dawn. This is a comic book that was written by a human. The human arranged all the pictures to make the comic book, but the images themselves were wholly created by AI. It was originally registered by the Copyright Office in September, and it was touted like, oh my God, they just gave IP protection, copyright protection to this work involving AI. It's the first ever AI involved work to get copyright protection. And the Copyright Office caught wind of this and realized that it wasn't disclosed that these images were made by AI, and they rescinded the copyright registration. The artist, the author, Castanova, she responded in November 22, trying to explain that there was an element of human authorship, that there should be an extent of copyright protection here. One of which is the what's a term of art called order coordination or selection coordination and arrangement, where it's not that she just put in the inputs into Midjourney, got the art and took it and used it immediately. She scoured through Midjourney, going input after input, using those functions I was talking about earlier until she found the exact kind of art that she was looking for her comic book, and then arranged them in a very particular creative way. She also explained that some of the AI work that she worked on, she edited herself through Photoshop. She was claiming that her work on these images in selecting them, choosing them, and editing them should be enough to instill copyright ownership in the art. Copyright responded just last week. Copyright Office just responded, granting a new registration, but it only protects Castanova's text, because that was originally created by her, and protects the selection, coordination, and arrangement of the images to form the comic book itself. They're still refusing to grant copyright ownership and copyright protection in the artwork itself. And they address some of these arguments, saying that the inputs that she put in deliberately to generate these images was not enough human contribution to create copyright ownership. And these edits were not enough to create copyright ownership. And she has since responded, saying that she's really happy that at least a registration for the comic book was issued, but that it seems like she's still going to be fighting to try to get the artwork protected as well. And this distinction is really important to grasp, because the selection, coordination, and arrangement of the work having copyright protection in that is what's called thin copyright protection. What exactly can you exclude others from doing? She can't exclude others from finding the images within the comic book and just saying, oh, I like that particular image, taking it and pasting it somewhere. Within copyright protection, it really needs to be closer to literal copy, which in this case it was. People were taking her whole comic book and pasting it elsewhere without her permission. So she can't prevent people from doing that, but in terms of the art itself, there's nothing stopping people from taking that and using it for their own purposes. So my take and your takeaways with respect to AI versus you in terms of IP ownership. Like I mentioned, it doesn't seem that there's going to be any budging at all when it comes to wholly AI generated content. You need human involvement to have copyright and patent protection in it. The comic book case, however, it leaves a door open where there seems to be an extent of human involvement where you can get some copyright protection in AI created works, but it needs to be sufficient, and that line right now is a little blurry. Just to speculate, it's pretty clear that the human inputs will not be enough, which I think makes sense. I don't think there's any difference between you putting in the prompts into Midjourney saying, I want this image, I want it to look this way, and you going to a human artist or graphic designer, giving them the exact same prompts and then creating it for you. Just like you wouldn't have the IP ownership automatically in that artist's work, you wouldn't have IP ownership just through inputs of what the AI created for you. When it comes to human additions and alterations, it's a tougher line, and there may have been a possibility where Castanova's work on those images could have been enough to instill copyright ownership in them. They said, with respect to the edit that she was making of the artwork, they said they couldn't definitively conclude that there was enough human contribution, suggesting that if there was enough more substantial edits made, more substantial changes that she intentionally made to the AI generated art, that there could be copyright ownership in the edited artwork. And that, I use the art just as a clear example, but that could be the same for text written by AI, and your editing of them and inserting your own words and language, rewriting them and editorializing them further. It's hard to tell where that line is, but the Casanova case suggests that there is a line. And finally, just to reiterate, your rights in the AI depend on what kind of rights you're trying to seek. Going back to the trademark example. Copyright, there's certain requirements to have copyright protection, and when it comes to trademark, there's other requirements there. So it's important to distinguish the two. It's important to ask yourself, what is the purpose that I want to use and protect behind this AI created work? So the other prong, AI relationship to others, and when they are scraping data and creating this content in the first place. Are these bots breaking the law? There is a litany of litigation right now asking that exact question. So there is a class action lawsuit against that coding Copilot. I mentioned GitHub Copilot by software developers. There is a class action lawsuit by artists against Stability AI, a company behind Stable Diffusion, one of the art generators. And in the UK, Getty Images also just sued Stability AI for taking its images and using its image generator. And the big question here of whether they are infringing, I'm not going to get into the elements of infringement, because I think the closer question here, and what is definitely going to be raised in these cases, is does what these AIs are doing, does it constitute what's called fair use? A term that I'm sure many of us have heard, but maybe many of us don't fully understand what the elements of that are, or what that really looks like. So this was a comment submitted by OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, to the USPTO, where the USPTO sent out an inquiry trying to understand the IP implications of AI. And their central argument is that what we are doing, we are claiming fair use. So what is fair use? I think a lot of people sort of just do a gut check and think of, fair use. I know it when I see it. And there's sort of a moral sort of discussion. Does this feel right? Does it feel like they can do this? But in particular, there's 4 factors that courts look at when they're determining fair use. First, the purpose and character of the use. How is the copyrighted work being used by the alleged infringer? They look specifically to if it's being commercialized or if it's rather being used for an educational purpose. There's a lot of questions being asked right now of how OpenAI started out as a nonprofit, but suddenly became a for-profit, possibly to circumvent fair use, or originally nonprofit to avoid or strengthen their fair use argument, I should say. Also, the nature of the copyrighted work, that is going back to the concept of thick and thin protection. Is it a very expressive work that warrants the utmost protection, or is it something that only literal copying would cause infringement? Amount substantially as a portion used by the alleged infringer, and the effect of that alleged infringer's use on the potential market for the original owner of the work. 1 and 4 are the most important factors that courts look at, or they give them the greatest weight. And particularly number 1, the Supreme Court has developed a test to understand whether the purpose and character of the use constitutes fair use. And it calls it, is it transformative use? That's the central question. And by transformative use, they're asking, does the use of the alleged infringer create something new? Is it new expression? Is it of different character of what the original work was? And this has been a crutch, so to speak, for many alleged infringers in the copyright space. And no company has used the concept of transformative use for its betterment more than Google. And there's three prior fair use cases that I think will be important to look at as we think about the extent of IP infringement with respect to AI. So first is Perfect 10, the Amazon. This is when Google was sued for Google Images. And it's funny to think about that now with how well established Google Images is these days. It seems perfectly fine because it's just been around for years and years and years. But if you were just to think about it, if you're just to forget about it and think about it for the first time, make the first impression, and just describe it to an alien, let's say, and say, no, there's this site, right, that scours the internet and finds images that are produced and posted by other people, and then it takes exact copies of those images and put it on its own website that people can go to, so they don't have to go to them. That totally sounds like copyright infringement. You get out of your mind, like, how is that fair to the people who originally created the work? Well, they were sued for that in 2007, and the court said, of course, Google's use of posting all the thumbnails of those images on Google Images is highly transformative, provides a social benefit. It puts those images in a different context where people can search for them and have them right away. And even though it's using the entire photograph, even though it's an exact copy of what this person already created, it's necessary for the use of Google. Similarly, a few years later, Google was sued for Google Books. Google went across the country, library by library, checked out books, scanned them page by page, and put them in their database and created them into searchable text for people to look up snippets from Google Books and have it pasted right there so they didn't have to go to the library and open the book themselves. Again, what? Like they're just blatantly copying the entire thing for its own purpose. How is that fair use? How is that not infringement? Again, the courts say it was highly transformative. Even though there was a commercial motivation, they commercialized it and Google is getting a buck out of it. It's not competing directly with the books. It's serving a general social purpose. And even though, again, they're taking direct copies, the direct copying of that was necessary for Google to do this cool thing that it was doing. So again, Google wins. And then just a couple years ago, Google was once by Oracle for copying over 10,000 lines of code when it was creating its Android operating system. Again, Google prevailed under fair use grounds. And again, the court was using, this time it was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to hear on appeal these two cases from the Court of Appeals, but it actually took this case up, but it was still using the same transformative language of it's going to help create new products. It's going to, open the creativity of smartphone programmers. So even though they took over 10,000 lines of code, this was necessary to unlock programmers' creative energies. So Google has vastly benefited from this transformative use test that so long as you're creating something new and different, you can be protected under fair use grounds. And I think transformative use is going to be a pretty solid defense for AI companies moving forward, because if you have things like Google Images, Google Books, where Google is blatantly taking total copies of someone's copyrighted work and just putting it in another space for people to find, it's hard to dismiss something like Midjourney or ChatGPT that instead learns from these copyrighted works, and rather than take them copy or verbatim, they synthesize them and create a totally original new work from that. It seems like transformative use is going to be a very popular defense for AIs. Once again, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but it could go away very soon. This is a case, Warhol v. Goldsmith, that was just heard in oral argument by the Supreme Court back in October. Facts are pretty simple. Goldsmith took this photograph of Prince, and then later Andy Warhol used that photographic print to create these artworks. And Warhol was sued for copyright infringement. And the main defense is it's transformative. It's creating something new, it's creating something different. Well, the transformative use test that was originally adopted by the Supreme Court is now being under scrutiny. This Supreme Court now that's in session is reviewing and potentially reinterpreting what transformative use constitutes. We should be getting a decision on this in the next few months, and depending on how this case turns out, it could turn this whole thing on its head. So it's particularly important to keep an eye on this when this decision comes out. And talk about what the implications are with respect to AI and transformative use. So finally, your takeaways, this litigation is only the beginning. There's going to be many more as people, not only in the IT space, but in the other issues I raised, potentially file lawsuits to figure out these legal issues. There is admittedly a bumpy road ahead for artificial intelligence. But these prior fair use cases seem to suggest that there may be a way out for the AI to claim fair use in what they're doing, relying on this transformative use test that has been in Google's back pocket for years and years now. But it could go away with this upcoming SCOTUS decision. So important to keep an eye on that in the coming months. For now, I would just suggest playing around with AI, getting familiar with all the tools that I mentioned, seeing and thinking about ways to incorporate it into your business, how it can help you, how it can make you more efficient, productive, save time, save money. I wouldn't rely on it completely, given how these things may turn out, how these cases may turn out. But I think in any event, AI is only going to continue to grow and become even more present in our daily life, in our daily business. So it's important to get familiar with it now and understand the full extent of its capabilities. And I also know we have some AI developers in the room. For you in particular, I would particularly pay close attention to these cases as they develop and understand the extent of potential liability and ways to lean more towards fair use to insulate yourself from potential liability. But that is all I have to start with now, and I'm happy to take more questions and discussions.
So you mentioned the Creative Commons release for computing, was it under the free version? Creative Commons license and every other open license I'm aware of relies on specific extension of copyright. So the ownership of the copyright by the creator is then created with this license that's conditional on behavior, right? That then creates the thing, which means that if the United States feels that AI generated things can't actually be copyrighted in any way, shape, or form, the actual fundamental basis of that licensing would just vanish. To what extent, and having written stuff, would that cover the trademark issues, plus anything else? Also, you wouldn't be able to have it signing if you need it under those circumstances. There'd be nothing to sign because it couldn't be copyrighted. And then, sidebar, one of the currently big open questions is like whether or not this is going to be like versus community design. Much may be hope, but it's now possible for these things to generate basically passable philosophical essays at dissertation levels in seconds, and the paid people that built those systems specifically advertise their capacity to show that it's not plagiarizing in any way. It's detectable. And there is some work towards detection of AI. As those detector filters improve, that's not only going to improve the AI production, but also opens up possibilities of a detection-based attack, where if your company has important IP and somebody else can demonstrate a reasonably high chance of AI input into that to disqualify whatever IP protections you have. Are there discussions around that, or are people thinking along these lines? And like, if the entire baseline is actually far off, then it's just a lot less. What's going on with that stuff?
Yeah, so I'll try to take that bit.
Slide.
Right. So as far as the first question, great catch on this whole idea of Midjourney in their license agreement trying to say we are not licensing IP ownership to you. We're not allowing to use it for trademark purposes. But to my point, it's fully AI generated content and there's not copyright protection to be there to begin with. Who are they to say what you can and cannot do with it? That is a valid point, and it's something that, in terms of, as far as copyright is concerned, could be a challenge that could be raised to that restriction on trademark use. I wanted you to still be aware of it in case IP ownership in AI wholly generated content or just AI content in general changes over the years, to just keep in mind what exactly these AI developers are putting buried into those contracts. But even notwithstanding the copyright issues there is still just the terms of service that we're agreeing to. It's not so much the assignment of the IP right, it's your use of the service that they're providing you. So it's not so much an intellectual property question as much as it's a contract question. You are contracting with Midjourney, let's say, saying, if you create this cool stuff with me, I'm promising I won't use it for trademark. So there are still legal hurdles there that still give it a bit of teeth, but you're absolutely right that as far as copyright and IP is concerned, there could be complications there. As far as the question on wiping out humanities, I'll bear that torch as a liberal arts major. But it's something that is being there is a backlash, let's say. I know there's a huge wave in academia right now of how do we address this, not only with respect to things like using it for essays, but for kids to cheat, let's say, but also just, making sure we're keeping our kids educated and keeping them engaged and making them develop their own skills and things of that nature. There's a lot of steps that have been taken, both in that space and with people with respect to trying to tell whether an AI bot scrape their data or scrape their work in creating its content. There's a lot of sort of reverse engineering technologies out there. I'm blanking on the name now, but there is one of our, I think DeviantArt provides it. It either flags and sort of prevents your art from being scraped by AI, or it will tell you if your art has been scraped by an AI. There's also the product ChatGPT 0, which is an equivalent, or it's similar to Turnitin, where it teaches people checking for plagiarism, where it will sort of reverse engineer and try to give you a suggestion of whether AI was used to create it. My little pitch on AI is when it comes to things like humanities and how much should it replace human created content, especially those of the humanities and things like the human condition. I think I think there's a balance in between where AI is not completely substituting, and it shouldn't be fought against and completely banned, and it shouldn't also just be used as a complete crutch that substitutes all human creation. There is a middle ground where humans can just use it to open up their own minds and open up their own capabilities and just become more efficient. I think like Justin and I did an example the other day when we put in ChatGPT. We just did a writing essay about the significance of the green light for Great Gatsby. And as a bad student, I could, just take that, copy it, paste it into my homework and be like, there you go. But it could be instead used as a tool, whereas I still want to add my own interpretation in that essay and rather just use ChatGPT as almost like a research assistant, where I'm like, I want to write about the green light, specifically green light significance in Great Gatsby. He just gave me the page citations of where the green light appears so I could read it. That I think should be encouraged. And it's just using the tools at your disposal to become more efficient and effective. I don't see an inherent problem with that, but it's going to be a very difficult question to grapple with for years to come. Yeah.
So what happens when, and I agree with you that I've used it as a tool and it can be sort of can rely on those people to do that. Is there a scenario in which AI becomes this incredible echo chamber and AI begins scraping AI, begins scraping AI, and how do we distinguish at that point what's what and what's original art and all that?
Yeah. So another difficult question to grapple with when it comes with AI, and not so much in the IP space, but with respect to the other issues I was raising on that earlier slide, the challenges that are being brought to AI, things with respect to bias and things with respect to veracity. There's been a big call to action and immediate response for there to be a greater sense of source identification, attribution of where you got it, and just more transparency in how these AIs are creating their responses. And it will be interesting to see how it develops, what steps need to be taken either privately or publicly from, like, let's say, federal government regulation of what these AIs need to disclose. I don't really have an answer for it. It's definitely something that is of concern, and we'll just have to see how steps are taken to sort of prevent that, because I think that is a really valid concern.
The technical note on this one, deep learning, that's more or less the technical definition of deep learning, is the AI self-scraping to level itself up to the point where it gets interesting to us. So
Right, but I guess, I mean, from an IP standpoint, it must get very muddled when AI is looking at AI. Because if people are creating things using AI, then that's what's going to be on the internet. That's what it's going to be scraping. Now, if you put it in a private setting, with this machine learning for your own data, that's a different story. But I just think in the public domain, people are going to be putting out more and more stuff. That turns to be scraped. And we can take an echo chamber, right?
And it's an interesting point in that, and how's that form a policy argument for rethinking interpretation of IP ownership and AI generated content? They seem to be, they meaning the Copyright Office, the USPTO, and the courts seem to be relying on the statutes of these IP rights, saying the language is very clear. It says a human needs to make it well. Just practically, does that interpretation need to change? With respect to your echo chamber point, but also having that as a rule may create a moral hazard where people create AI art or AI work, and then they submit it to, let's say, the Copyright Office, and they just don't disclose that it was created by an AI or they use an AI. And that will, to your point, only get harder and harder to detect as time goes on. Is requiring this human element of authorship, is it punishing the good actors who fully disclose and are transparent? Yeah, I used AI to create this, and they don't get copyright protection, but the people who say, I'm not going to disclose that it was made by AI, and I don't think you can tell that it was made by AI, getting copyright protection.
Yeah, I was going to ask, at what point does it become not enforceable? Because with the comic book case, how did the Copyright Office find out that the images weren't created? Like good faith on the authors?
No, so it was that situation where there's specific spots in the copyright application where you need to disclose contributions to the work. There's a little bit of a debate, confusion of where exactly AI fits into it. It's mostly for like joint authors, like this person helped me make this, and I need to tell you that. But she did not include that in her original application. It wasn't until the registration was issued and then it was sort of touted like articles in the mainstream of this AI generated work was just given copyright protection, and then the copyright office was upset and said, we're rescinding this. You need to explain to us what your level of contribution in this work is or not being.
So in that case, the author could have owned the copyright.
Yeah, I think that is a likelihood, and it's a concern. And I mean, I can't even speak to artwork. I mean, think about the art that won the state fair competition. That person didn't disclose until after the fact that it was made by AI. No one felt the difference. So there may be works out there that are already registered with the Copyright Office that are AI created that no one said anything. So theoretically, she could have just kept it. I mean, to Castanova's point, she seems to be sort of a champion, like the Stephen Thaler gentleman I mentioned, of trying to push the envelope of AI creation. So she seems to be an open advocate of that. But there's a good trend, there may not have been anything preventing you from doing that.
Yes, I guess as a creator of AI assistants, dealing with this every day, it's really awesome. I love the example you show of the Warhol case
in the Supreme Court.
right now. I love it because it's
Really clear that the underlying
work is someone else's face,
someone else's likeness with someone else's trademark style fused together, how we're going to work this out.
Yeah.
So when we train AI systems,
That's
we have a number of things
we're using, and
we're
we're
training new AI.
so
We're creating new
systems,
putting in data, choosing what data to feed into the model to get
particular output.
one of the things everyone's really concerned about is,
If we use Getty images, it's a great example. There's, pseudo grid. Can we use,
Getty images under this fair use argument, which seems like a lot of companies are using fair use. That's sort of one way to
defend, hey, we're training this stuff, it's out there, it's in the public, we're transforming it for
the purpose. That's very useful. And then the higher ups sort of have to make a call about legal risks.
about what are we going to do in the next ones to be sued on, our very meaningful work on creating AIs to teach students like important topics. This is clearly like a useful thing. We're clearly transforming
work.
and
I have to make a call. What do I include in this training data? Right? Am I going to allow those Getty images?
so I
Creator sort of conflicted because I have to make a risk assessment where it's super useful.
just to have as much data as possible. Where do I draw the lines as best practices? And I have to assume that in general, if someone's sensitive about, if something's on Wikipedia, what we have done is say it's fair game if someone has Creative Commons content that's tagged Creative Commons right now, and if somebody is like Getty Images, where it's really clear that they sort of a pseudo, technically not Creative Commons, right? So it's their line. Like how do you sort of recommend the AI creators sort of draw those lines between what would feed into the training data?
Yeah, so it's, you're absolutely right that it's a risk assessment and people have different tolerances and preferences. Steps that could be taken, in addition, I think you're thinking the right things of identifying the ownership and the extent of copyright protection. I mean, Getty Images is notorious for its protection of its copyrighted works. You want to think, I just focus now on the transformative use. I think that's the most interesting. It's probably the biggest prong, and it's one that, like I mentioned, could be changing very soon and something to keep an eye on. But just remember those other 4 prongs that are still active. And like in your instance, with respect to using it for education purposes, that's something you also have to keep in mind. And it's not just the nature of work and how it's used, it's the purpose behind what you are using it for. So I would say using that sort of balancing test, if you are using it for educational purposes versus commercializing it, if you're only taking a little bit versus a lot, like the sort of maybe distribution of those images in the data set, it's a case by case basis, and like I said, it's risk preferences, but those are the kind of things I think that you should be keeping in mind.
We do a lot of visitor information here in Charleston, and the website and the application of books. And one of the challenges that we have is we want to show people and activities. And obviously, it's a judgment call what percentage of a person's face has to be present before a release has to be generated. Can't take a picture.
The crowd at the Super Bowl said, yeah, I was there and you took my picture. Right? When we can change the culture of a person's face, does that now move us out of the requirement of any kind of release
that person really doesn't exist, and now it's just a caricature of a child or a woman that's looking at something. That is always the challenge. Is we want to protect people doing activity at a winery, at a brewery, at a restaurant. But getting releases and getting all that is a major hassle. I mean, it's a significant. You say, oh, we're gonna use it on our website, and I can't do that because then I'm gonna be on, my face is gonna be put on the side of the board. So what is the legal issue now with alternate faces to this person doesn't exist? Is that a solution for us to get releases?
Yeah, great question. And that's something that I think that website that I was showing you is addressing. I mean, that is a machine learning, image learning tool that is taking real images from people and essentially learning products to compile these super realistic photos of people that don't in fact exist. So there's like sort of two sides of the coin. It doesn't directly go to the issue. The first side doesn't directly go to the issue. That's what I think is still important to bring up, which is the use of someone's face alternatively, like with respect to deep face, like I was talking about, happening a lot in movies with respect to celebrities, happening a lot in pornography right now, like a big concern of both identity theft and right of publicity issues. When it comes to the other side of the coin, where you're instead changing someone's face, not taking their face and using it for other purposes, but editing it to, let's say, make them indistinguishable, right of privacy and right of publicity need to be, the person needs to be readily identifiable in the image to use it. So another example of in your pictures, if like someone's just hand is showing or just a body part, like not a concern because no one's going to tell them. It is. But to answer your question, I think that the use of AI technology and editing their face to make them unrecognizable is a tactic. I mean, I don't see it very much different from just blurring the person's face out.
Yeah, and we now are kind of stuck in this correctness kind of mode where if I don't have a certain blending of colors in a picture that we're using commercially, that we have to reshoot. And that could potentially open up a lot of opportunities to utilize images where we shoot. Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at how it's going to work. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you have an opinion about where the bar, or if there's any sort of indication based on what's been decided so far, where the bar is in terms of the human editing part of that. And I'm specifically thinking of a project where we used AI to create some logos, but the logo, that was just the idea. The logo was created based on that, but it was redrawn a little differently by the human.
Right, so like mock-ups, like concept.
Yeah, so it's close, but it's different.
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. As far as on a general matter, where is that line of human contribution going to be enough? That is a case by case basis. I think there's no clear set parameters or real guidelines, at least at this time, what would be necessary. To the point.
Do you have an idea what's on the horizon based on what you're seeing? There could be a bar at some point.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be more so like active human involvement. I think the Cast Nova example gives a pretty solid hint, particularly in the intentional way that the Copyright Office worded it when they were addressing the they just readily dismissed the inputs, right? And all the images that she created and for her choosing, they weren't impressed by that. They were a little bit more delicate in their language when they were talking about the editing of those photos. Just saying, they didn't say that editing of AI photos isn't enough, or they're not saying that they didn't say that it wasn't enough, but they specifically said that they couldn't definitively conclude, which to me suggests that they could conclude and you saw the images, they were pretty similar. There was only like a little bit of like touch-up
It's
work.
almost like it's insufficient, but there might be a sufficiency.
Exactly. I think is what the copyright stance on that was. So I think in your particular example, I mean, again, it's case by case, and like there would need to be a particular look at it. I appreciate that. But I seem like using it as concept art to then create your own creation, I think could be promising moving forward.
Technical point also with the question you had occurred to me. Has there been any discussions that you're aware of or thoughts about getting Disney on side? Because Pixar, and if you're not aware of Deep Canvas, which was developed in like I think Treasure Planet, Tarzan, and Atlantis all used, basically meant that Disney's animation for the last 2 decades has been completely machine generated from human input, and by 100% of the sort of levels that you've just laid out here. There's absolutely no technical or legal distinction that could possibly be made between, what she was doing and what the developers of Tarzan were doing, because they needed the machine to be able to put drawings onto models through three-dimensional image to create those things, according to them. And there's hundreds of hours of videos that they released of behind-the-scenes things of the people creating those things saying so to camera. So is that a potential possibility? Because Disney seems to have the copyright office wrapped around their little finger, and could just establish that AIs that are at the very least owned by the Disney Corporation could have copyrights.
Yeah, no, we have Disney to thank for the incredibly complex rules on copyright duration, for sure. Yes, that's an interesting point, and it makes me think, again, going back to Google Images, where we kind of just have we've come acquainted to it and used to it, and don't really think about legal implications there. Same thing with the camera when it first came out. There was a case of a photograph taken by Oscar Wilde that the photographer was trying to claim copyright ownership in. And the challenge was, you didn't create that, the machine did. It was the camera that actually took the picture. So you can't claim copyright protection. Very similar to what the conversation of AI is right now. The photographer in that case eventually prevailed because the court determined that no, there is human intention there. It's how you pointed the camera, it's the lighting, it's how you positioned Oscar Wilde and told him to pose when you took the shot. So I think there is going to be a development in your incorporation of AI, such that if it's used more as a tool rather than a replacement of like human ingenuity and human creativity, that I think there is a realm there where there could be copyright protection in those works, and I wouldn't be surprised if Disney.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that if Cars can't be copyrighted in any way, that's like the 4th or 5th most valuable entertainment franchise on earth. And we could get some solid laws in here really fast.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, this might be a little bit off subject, maybe a different talk at some point, but I'm curious if someone like a young entrepreneur is trying to figure out what he wants to be doing, to get started in whatever it is, endeavor that he's going to take up. How is this going to affect? I mean, what jobs are going to be eliminated? What jobs would someone, want to do? What would they try to study? Because I know a lot of people go to school, they study something for 4 years, and by the time they're done, they study is obsolete. And that seems like this is something that's gonna be, something we need to think about, or somebody needs to think about what is gonna be eliminated and what jobs or what things will we study or do to try to make sure we have job security so much in the future.
Oh, yeah, that is a tough question.
Content writers are not happy with this.
Yeah, no, for content writers, copywriters,
Editors.
journalists, artists, like there's, I mean, when I was in college, and I needed to choose a major, or choose a career, I thought to myself, I saw on the horizon very vaguely the direction of the world, like as we all did. And I told myself, I want a job that either is building computers or will be a job that a computer can't replace. And that, among other things, led me into the law, and with respect to like other humanities, where I feel like there is a specific human requirement there, of human ingenuity and insight. And now AI is coming out, and there's now even legal and lawyer AIs coming out. And it's hard to tell like what's going to be replaced, and like how much optimization and automation are we really going to see here. Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know if other people in the room have thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely have a thought. Well, it's interesting because I'll tag right on to that. Is what I was going to bring up is Washington Post had a great article called the hottest job right now is, it's funny because I just looked at the article and it was prompt engineer, right? Who can work with AI
Right.
by prompting it well, and they actually changed the headline to prompt whisperer. So, dynamically, right?
Yeah.
From the time I saw the article the first time, now they've changed the headline. And that's an interesting thing. Because I loved your camera analogy. It's a perfect analogy. It's like, the camera doesn't take the picture. I mean, camera takes the picture, but someone has to guide the camera. Maybe it's the same with AI, right? Someone has to learn how to guide the AI to produce something. And maybe ultimately is that protected because of how they guided the AI. So are prompt engineers in the future, prompt whisperers, going to be the new artists?
But do you have to document that? When we write an article for our website or for our book, do we have to keep
that may be a new citation.
A new citation. This is what we do to
Yeah.
get this answer.
Yeah.
And so somebody says, no, copyright infringement. Well, no, this is how we did it.
The Isaac Asimov multi-vac short stories actually propose a world where that is, in fact, the only thing that's worth doing. So that's a very old idea.
Yeah.
Alan Turing actually goes into this in his paper and points out that basically understanding computation to be what he's claiming it to be upends our understanding of understanding.
Mhm.
And philosophy and imagination. And there's also the story of Gödel's, Kurt Gödel, who came up with incompleteness in logic. He was a good friend of Albert Einstein, and there's a famous story about his citizenship. He couldn't speak English, and they gave him citizenship anyway because he's one of the smartest people on earth. And so during his citizenship test, he was asked how the Constitution of the United States would prevent a Hitler or dictator from rising. And being the logician that figured out how logic was broken, he immediately started declaring the logically sound ways in which the Constitution would in fact support the introduction of totalitarian fascism here in the United States. Einstein cut him off, and sort of the State Department guy that's sitting over there, just like stamp the papers, we're getting out of here now. But yeah, there's actually, as I was pointing out, with Creative Commons covering something that might not even be coverable under copyright, and so there's a recursive validity failure step in the legal profession, and that's not
If I might also add on top of the advice, because I deal with a lot of young entrepreneurs, I have to jump out right here to talk to some entrepreneurs about their AI strategy. The number one piece of advice I give all people in college right now is learn how the stuff works as quickly as you can. The bright news is with 1 hour of good research, you can get yourself pretty. There's an appearance that it's really complicated. The transformer architecture behind GPT-3, there's a great video from Andre Kapathy, former head of AI at Tesla, and he sits down and he codes the architecture in under an hour. Anyone with a familiarity with Python would be able to follow along. The actual way that these things work are much simpler than they appear. And so my strategy has been on the education side. Let's just make sure, we have math skills, we have language skills. Everyone should train a neural network before they graduate high school. That's sort of my personal opinion and how we've been dealing with it. And that way, okay, we're not just consuming the things that large companies have made. It's a collaboration, and my hope here is there's just going to be a new fluency, just like we have math. Working with AI, I think the jobs will flow from an understanding of creating. And that's why I spend the other part of my time actually teaching everyone, including, I have an IP lawyer who's been writing patents on, and so, a collaboration with people who are making AI, that's essential, and they need to be training this stuff every day, and we're having them train everyone in the firm, not just like using, but actually going down and having a sense how things work under the hood, because it actually is just simple ideas rehashed and maybe obfuscated a little bit. Anyway, that's my pitch. It's sort of like, let's learn it, and it's an education challenge more than anything.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And if we could go back to the IP ownership of what you just said. So, for AI developers, a lot of the methodology under the hood is replicated from network to network to network to network. So if I take a network and I choose to train that to detect a banana in an image, is that a distinct invention from a network that detects a basketball in an image? And could I own either of those in the IP?
Yeah, so that's getting into patent and what patent protects of not just inventions, but methods and processes. That would be interesting to look into. So I mentioned when I was going through just a brief overview of what patents do and protecting people from making, using, selling, not necessarily your invention, but there's an element by element test that needs to be expressly claimed in your patent applications, because I mentioned you need to file and register in order to have patent protection. Either all of those claims or through a rule called the doctrine of equivalence, where it's close enough. And that is with respect to like patent infringement, but also just in trying to obtain a patent and patent prosecution. There's whole like validity requirements of novelty and non-obviousness. If you, let's say, do have a patent in an AI that recognizes an image of a banana, and then you in turn try to separately patent a separate patent application that does it with the basketball, you would need to explain and convince the Copyright Office that those are two separate inventions, that one isn't, like the latter isn't obvious or not new when compared to the former. So it's hard to say in general terms.
Do you know if any of this has been prosecuted yet? Like examples of the space in the IP law? Because from my perspective as a developer, we're all doing the same thing for the most part. We just have different inputs into a very similar network architecture with different stated goals for the outputs, but the fundamental technology is very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who owns the network architecture?
Right, that's an interesting question that I would need to look further into.
Yeah, that's a big question for my company because we, develop several unique products, unique networks, but the foundational technology is very similar. So do we need to get, into every single one of our base claims, detection of this, detection of this, detection of this, and is every other company doing that? And who owns it? Or can you own the network? But
right,
we're so late in the game, we can't own the network. MIT, Media Lab owns the network. Their IP completely covers that.
Yeah, I think it would require a deeper, like more specific look into the processes themselves and figure out that claim construction. It's always in any invention, it's a delicate balance to strike. But you do want to save the time of not having to file patent after patent for every process that it does, but also have a patent that's not overly broad, that other people can try to circumvent you by creating processes and try to claim, oh no, it does this different thing, so it doesn't fall under their patent protection. It's a super delicate balance to strike that there's no one size fits all. Sure.
How about copyright, since the network is a large data pool?
Well, Google stole Oracle's code and said it was transformative fair use. So
yeah. Using code for exactly what it's written for.
Protecting software is very difficult.
Yeah, and when you come to software and specifically code, it is currently copyrightable, and it was a frustrating stance because that in itself is a debate whether it should be. And in the Oracle case, the Supreme Court was tasked to state whether code, in addition to patent protection, could be copyrighted. And they just completely punted on it and said, we're not going to talk about this because it's fair use in any event.
Yeah, well, I work for companies who intentionally don't patent software inventions because they don't think they're protectable. So.
And patents only last 20 years from filing. Yeah. Copyright lasts a lot longer.
Yeah, but AI is moving so fast, 20 years is another lifetime.
Yeah, it's going to be a completely different.
It's crazy.
Grant.
Yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because essentially what it seems like is basically we have one architecture more or less that hasn't changed for about 5 years, which is a lifetime for AI. If we're being optimistic, we've figured out an awesome architecture. We don't need to tweak it. It's really about the knobs, the weights in the neural network end up being the value.
Right.
And I guess if you're trying to modify a new thing, having the data that produced it is helpful because it tells you the weights. So I guess, I haven't seen things getting tested in entrepreneurial circles yet about like, I have these weights for this standard Lego block. Everyone has the same Lego block, but I have, trained painstakingly a beautiful composition that detects bananas with 99.99%. That's actually a big part of the data set. Last week, there was a new algorithm, YOLO 7, which does actually detect bananas with higher reliability, and it's in the data set as one of the object detection things. Algorithms open source, it's published, but the weights behind the network, if someone makes something truly valuable, I think that at least the intuition I've been sticking with is if you create something of real value, there's room to protect it down the road. And the challenges that we're dealing with, how much to share, because about how the thing was trained. Because if you give someone the weights, that's like all your secret sauce. It's like sort of the actual use flow. But
well, also, as you pointed out, since these things are in fact so relatively easy to work with and basic, The fact that you can train something to accurately determine bananas
Yes,
means that if you don't need
You go beyond.
99.99
Right.
today,
right.
maybe you can get the intern to train you up an 80% one this afternoon,
Yeah,
and then that's yours. Like,
yeah. Yeah, the 80% banana test that's, we use that actually with kids as a training. It's like the banana test, turns out that's like a very colorful thing for some reason. We're good on bananas, but sometimes you need 99.99 if you're a dole and you're trying to detect bananas on the factory floor. They need like the world's best machine learning computer vision system for fruit, and that should probably be protected, and they should probably use the standard Lego bricks, but then bring their magic. That seems fair. And that sort of, with this derivative work thing, that's the thing that we've been struggling the most with, which is like under the hood to get to this point to detecting bananas at 80%, there was the foundation of just how do you read images, seeing edges and lines and understanding a scene that is, let's say, the foundation that everyone's building on. Everyone's building on top of that foundation, and then fine tuning, like, all right, this is specifically what a good banana is, it's this color, this spot, this size. It seems really fair that that's value on its own. But if you've built that detector on top of a foundation that is, trained on all the images on, scraped from the internet, do we have an obligation that because it's like, it is definitely derived, like the Andy Warhol example, is derived from data that I didn't own, and I'm getting a ton of value from it. Where does that, do I deserve, can I get a copyright on that if clearly my work it's clearly a derivative work? And where does the line get drawn when you have a derivative work that's original enough that you have unique protection for it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There is, I focus just on the fair use because I think that's probably, given Google's history, like the problem that people are going to focus the most on. But I mentioned, like, even before you can get to fair use as a defense, before you can even sort of address the defense, you need to determine whether there's infringement at all, which has its own level of inquiry that depends on the amount, like the amount of copying, the kind of copying, like how it's being used. So there's concepts like, is it just like there's like, is it de minimis? Is what you're taking de minimis compared to what overall work you created? And then there's concepts of levels of abstraction that you need to sort of parse through when you're talking about whether there's copyright infringement. So let's say, like, if I were to just, well, it's a bad example because it's in the public domain now, but Romeo and Juliet, let's say, is the popular example. If you copy and paste verbatim Romeo and Juliet, if it were copyright protected, like that would be infringement, like literal infringement. But there's still elements of non-literal infringement depending on how abstract you want to go. So there's taking the literal thing versus if I'm just read Romeo and Juliet and I'm inspired to write like my own love story that has my own creative elements in it, that would not constitute infringement. It would constitute my own original work. And then there's an entire spectrum in between that, where maybe it's still a separate love story, but my characters are still named Romeo and Juliet and it's taking place in Verona, and there's still enough similarities there that it breaches into infringement and copying and creating a derivative work. So tough to say case by case, but before you can even get to like, is this fair use, there's even that infringement threshold question that you need to ask.
And it sounds like because there's precedent for the fair use being a common argument, that's probably like the first, if I'm building a shield, that's probably like the first.
It's one of the most common. And I mean, in the case examples I was giving, like particularly like the Google and the lines of code, like those were the other one, the infringement question wasn't really there. Otherwise, there was like the validity question with can code be copied copyrighted, but in terms of,
It was clear that there was.
if they didn't find fair use, they would have been in trouble.
Okay, yeah.
Is the slide deck that you presented, is that available? Is that what we'll see online?
We'll
Yes.
send it, we weren't able to send it by Eventbrite, we couldn't attach,
Yeah.
so we have, I think your email addresses, we'll send an email.
It's an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you.